Welcome. My name is Jim Fabia, and I am the documentation lead for HPCC Systems. I have been with LexisNexis for 21 years and have worked with Gordon Smith, the enterprise lead architect that has created this exciting new feature, for more than 25 years. I'm proud to call him my friend, and I've enjoyed documenting his work throughout the years. An interesting aspect of writing technical documentation is that if an application is well designed, it's easy to describe and document. Well, Gordon's been making my job easy for more than a quarter of a century. But we came here to talk about notebooks, so let's begin. No, not those notebooks. ECL notebooks. So before we begin, let me remind you that if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A chat window at any time, and someone will answer. So what will we cover today? We're going to start with an introduction and overview about what notebooks are. Talk about installation and the requirements and how to set everything up. Examine some of the capabilities of ECL notebooks. See some simple examples and demos. Then see some more complex examples. And then talk about how you can help in the grand scheme of things. So what is a notebook? Well, if you aren't familiar with notebooks, you might be familiar with REPLs. That's read, evaluate, and print loop. A REPL is an interactive application where you can write a few lines of code, execute the code immediately, and see the output. Some of the examples of this are the Node.js console, IPython, and even the Bash shell. There's also the developer console found in most web browsers. But notebooks are the epitome of a REPL environment. They let you quickly stand up an environment where you can iterate and work on small chunks of code, execute that code or evaluate, see the result or print, and then loop, where you tweak it and try it again. But notebooks are not just great for running code, they're also great storytelling devices. Notebooks allow you to mix and match markdown elements like images and explanatory text with your code. Notebooks can be the perfect way to share and explain your ideas with colleagues or the public community. Well, the most popular notebook is the Jupyter Notebook. It's been used extensively in the data science community because of its rich Python support that's built in. Jupyter Notebooks also support other languages. It's the original web-based application used to create and share computational documents. Visual Studio Code has supported Jupyter Notebooks for several years, but recently they added native notebook support into the core of the VS Code libraries. This provided an opportunity for HPCC and ECL. The VS Code API allowed us to leverage notebook functionality via the ECL Language Extension for VS Code. That extension now includes native support for ECL notebooks. Notebooks are useful for documentation, that's my area, tutorials and training, demos, proofs of concept and what ifs, repeatable processes, and even dashboards. We'll see some examples of these in just a few minutes. But what notebooks are most useful for, telling a story with data. Now there's a technique that all good storytellers use, and that's don't say it, show it. Rather than saying that a character is angry, the writer might show it by describing his face turning red, his voice changing pitch, and hitting the table with his fist. When you show it, you don't have to tell it. The same holds true when you're demonstrating an attribute of data. So what will you need? Well, the first thing obviously is VS Code, and we recommend that always be the latest. The ECL Language Extension for VS Code, which is available from the VS Code Marketplace, very easy to install. You'll also need the Observable JavaScript Extension, or OJS. Now that's installed automatically with the ECL Language Extension, but I thought it important to mention it here as a requirement, even though it's automatically installed, just because you should know that you have something available. And you'll also need an ECL, an HPCC Systems platform to use. Now that can be the play.hpcsystems.com system that's publicly available, your own local deployment, be it a containerized deployment or bare metal or a cloud instance. What skills will you need? Well, obviously a basic knowledge of ECL, a rudimentary knowledge of the Markdown language, and you can use some of the slides that are coming up as a cheat sheet, because the Markdown language is very simple, and once you get the hang of it, it becomes second nature to you. And you'll need a basic understanding of observable JavaScript. You need a story to tell, and you'll need some data to use to tell that story. Now, you can get a lot of sample data sets on Kaggle.com, or you can use your own data. Now, once you install the ECL Language Extension in VS Code, you'll need to create some launch configurations. And the launch configurations are contained in a file called launch.json. If you're using it for the first time, when you open an ECL file, it should open up automatically, or you can select Open Configurations from the Run menu in VS Code. Now, once you create these, we suggest that you try some simple ECL before you try using notebooks. To add a configuration, when you're in the configuration in the launch.json file, you'll see a blue button like you see here on your screen that will let you add another configuration. You can add as many as you want, if you're talking to different target clusters. But let's, without further ado, let's see a quick demo. We're going to open VS Code and create a simple notebook. So here we have VS Code, and we're going to right-click on the conference folder and select New File. We're going to name it hello.eclnb. Now, the ECLNB extension automatically creates a notebook. We'll add a Markdown cell and use the hash symbol to indicate that this first line is a title. And then we'll add some explanatory text. Then we'll press the check mark button just above it, and that's going to render it in Markdown. And you can see now it looks more like documentation. We'll hover over that cell and add an ECL cell, add some ECL, and we have a little play button. And you'll see as it's executing, there's a progress indicator floating along the screen above the gray box, showing that it's running. And when it completes, it will show the results right below. So ECL notebooks have three types of cells. We saw two of them just now. The first being Markdown cells, and these cells support text formatting using the simple Markdown language. Markdown is a lightweight markup language that lets you add formatting elements to plain text documents, and it's one of the most popular markup languages. If you've used GitHub, you've probably read documents or readmes within GitHub that are written in Markdown, but they're rendered right inside your browser. The next type of cell is an ECL cell. Now, these cells support live ECL code. The code is syntax colorized and runnable, and when you run an ECL cell, the results will display right below the cell. And finally, we have observable JavaScript cells, or OJS cells. And you can see you can learn a lot about observable JavaScript on observablehq.com. You'll see a plethora of examples there and a lot of documentation about it. And one important thing is once you've run your ECL and you have a result set, that result set is now available to the observable JavaScript cells. So let's look at Markdown cells. Again, it's a lightweight markup language. It's one of the benefits of Markdown language is that it's easy to read even when it's not rendered. Even just the plain code, it's very easy to read. And again, if you use GitHub, you've probably seen README documents that are written in Markdown. Now here's some basic syntax. You'll see there are 3 levels of headings. You have a heading 1, a heading 2, and a heading 3. And those are created by adding a hash symbol before the text. So you would put a hash and then a space and then type the title of your section. To make a word bold, you would just encapsulate it inside of double asterisks. To italicize something, just a single asterisk on either side. You can make ordered lists, which are number 1, 2, 3. An unordered list, which is like a bullet list. You can have code samples, horizontal rules, hyperlinks, images. And it may take you a while to get used to seeing Markdown syntax in your text, especially if you're accustomed to WYSIWYG applications. But once you use it for a while, I think it'll become second nature to you. Now here's some extended syntax. And again, you can use these 2 slides as cheat sheets to get you started in Markdown. And you notice to do a code block, you use the 3 Grav accents before and after to encapsulate your code, and that will format a code block. Here's a sample of a document that's written in the Markdown language. This is just a README that's out on our GitHub repository, the HPCC Systems repository on GitHub. And VS Code makes it easy by allowing you to edit these in side-by-side view, where one side is the code and the other side is fully rendered. And to get that side-by-side view, you just click on the button at the top of your VS Code screen, or use Control-K followed by a V, and that'll open the 2 windows side by side. Let's talk about ECL cells, because that's the real reason you're here. Live ECL allows you to iterate through code in the context of a notebook. You can write the code, run it, examine the result, tweak the code, and then run it again. Well, this is great for demos and what-if scenarios, and using a combination of Markdown and ECL, you can create and share interactive notebooks that your audience can actually use and have a hands-on experience, because a hands-on demo can be a very effective means of demonstrating your point. And finally, there are observable JavaScript or OJS cells. Now, that's really the icing of the cake, because that provides extended capabilities, the foremost being visualizations. OJS is a declarative and reactive language, which means that if you change it in one place, it automatically changes everywhere else. Now, we've all heard the mantra of show it, don't say it, or a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, notebooks fully support these principles. The ECL language automatically installs the observable JavaScript extension, allowing you to create OJS notebooks by themselves if you want. But that's not the topic at hand. The benefit is that an OJS cell in an ECL notebook provides access to the query results in the scope of that notebook, and we'll see that in just a minute. So OJS is very similar to JavaScript, and again, if you've got to have any experience with JavaScript, you should pick this up quite easily. And observablehq.com has a lot of examples that make it easy for you to learn. So let's see some more capabilities of notebooks inside of VS Code. We're going to switch to VS Code again, and this time we're going to see a demo of some ECL code, creating a result, and then using that result to create a visualization in an OJS cell. So here's a more complex record definition, and you'll see that it has 25 fields in it, and we've got an inline data set that has those 25 fields and 25 rows of that. And we can peek at the data by just doing a D, which is the implicit output, and you'll see how it displays right below in a table format, which is built into the ECL Language Extension. And we can scroll to the right to see the other columns. Now we can also use OJS to display that data. And we know that a result set by default gets the name of result _1. And we'll display that. And then we can see the JSON array that is holding the result set. And the JSON array is what observable JavaScript understands. We can also use the built-in inputs.table method that's in OJS to render that. And you'll see that it looks very much like the one that's built into the ECL Language Extension. But shifting gears, let's do something a little more fun and create a donut pie chart, because 2 desserts are better than 1. So here's a record structure we'll use. It's a string and an unsigned for value. And we'll provide some data, and you'll notice there's 4 records, north, south, east, and west, and they have a value of 100, 200, 300, and 400 respectively. And we'll run that. And you'll notice that I named the data set this time, and the data set is named donut data, just so we have a name to reference. And we can see right below there that north is 100, south is 200, east is 300, and west is 400. Let's use observable JavaScript to render the donut chart. And you notice that we're using donut data in the OJS code. We'll press the play button, and there's our donut. And you can see at a glance that the west has 4 times as much as the north, twice as much as the south, and a little bit more than the east. But let's change the data. Let's go in and change west and make it 4,000. So this is an example of how we do a what if. And we'll run that ECL code. And now that the data set is available, we'll re-render the donut pie chart. And you'll see at a glance that the west is significantly larger and takes up almost all of our donut here. So it really, the picture really tells the story. So we were saying how notebooks are most useful for telling a story with data. So let's tell a story. In this next demo, we're going to use an ECL notebook to tell a simple story. But even though it's simple, I think you'll see how ECL notebooks can be useful for storytelling. So this is a story of a band. It's a story of a rock band. And you may recognize this band. It's played at some of our previous conferences. Well, the band wanted to measure their social media presence to monitor their popularity. So they quantify fan engagement based upon the number of likes they get each month. Well, in August, they were on TV, and that caused a spike in social media engagements. That spike lasted into September and then returned to a plateau afterwards, where their popularity was just a little bit higher than it was before. So here's our code. We've got a likes record. And you'll notice that I'm using an unsigned for, and we'll talk about that in a second. And there's our, we named the data set likes data, and we'll run that. And you can see the spike here in numbers, but that doesn't tell the story quite as much as a bar chart would. So we're going to do a plot using a bar chart. And you can see right away that in August and September, the number of likes are significantly higher. Now, I said I was going to talk about the unsigned, the reason I use an unsigned for. When I first wrote this code, I just made it an unsigned, and that becomes an integer 8 internally, which becomes a 64-bit integer, and JavaScript does not support 64-bit integers. So they would get converted to strings, and that would sort them alphabetically rather than numerically. So we would see 1, 10, 11, 12, and then 2. So I had to change that to an unsigned for so that it would remain a number and sort them numerically. So what are some other notebook features? You can clear the outputs of all cells. So if you recall, when we had those notebooks, once we ran it, the results were displaying below each cell. We may want to clear everything and just start all over again. And you can save results with or without, you can save a notebook with or without results. And the difference, the primary difference being that saving it without results will create a smaller file, but also if you want to save it with results, that way the person you're sharing it with won't have to run it, they can just look at it. But if you want to have give it the most effect, you want that hands-on demo, and you want them to be able to execute it themselves. There's another feature of doing a run all. So there's a button at the top of your screen in VS Code that lets you run all the cells. But there's one caveat there. If one cell is dependent on the results from a previous cell, it might create a race condition. So you might want to, you might not have the results ready when it's trying to render. So run all might not always work for every cell. You might have to rerun some of the later cells. You can drag and drop cells while you're designing. So if you change your mind about the order that you want to display something, you can easily drag them around. You can expand and collapse cells, which allows you to have more real estate on your screen. You can split cells. So if you have a cell with lengthy code, you can split it in two, and then maybe put some explanatory text in between the two cells. And you can also import observable JavaScript notebooks, and we'll see an example of that a little bit later. So let's see that right now. Let's see how we import an observable JavaScript notebook. So we're going to visit observablehq.com. And we're going to go explore, and we're going to explore recent. And you see all the examples that are available here. Well, we're going to pick this one. And this is one that's showing the foliage, showing the leaves change throughout the United States. We're going to copy the URL, and we're going to switch over to VS Code, create a new notebook. We'll call it foliage.eclnb. We'll add a code cell, and we'll change that to OJS. And then we'll use Control-Shift-P to get our command palette, type the word import, and then select import OJS, put in the URL and hit enter. And now you'll see right at the beginning that there's a markdown layer. So let's change that. We'll split the cells and change it to a markdown cell, remove the comments, and press the check mark to render it. So now we have a title, and we'll run this, and here it renders our choropleth. And you'll see with the spin box, as we go week to week, we can see the foliage changing and the leaves changing colors throughout the United States. And you'll see as the weeks go on, the leaves change colors almost everywhere, except where I live, which is South Florida, because palm trees are always green, so they don't change color. So now we're going to talk about a thing called Gitpod. It's a little bit off topic, but it's exciting to note that ECL notebooks are fully supported in Gitpod. Gitpod is an open source Kubernetes application that automates the provisioning of a development environment. In this case, an HPCC Systems platform and a web-based instance of VS Code. Nothing to install, nothing to configure, although you can, and it's free for open source projects up to 50 hours a month. They do have a paid subscription as well that gives you some additional capabilities and removes that limitation of 50 hours per month. So we'll open a browser, we'll go to the GitHub repository where I have a Gitpod instance. And this is my personal repository that I have forked from Gordon's repository of the ECL Playground. And we'll scroll down just a little bit where there's a link to launch this playground on Gitpod. And the first thing it does is it checks my project, provisions a workspace, pulls a container image, and this is the one that's named inside of my Gitpod configuration. And then it starts that workspace. And that workspace is in the form of a browser-based instance of VS Code. You'll see in the terminal window that it's starting a bare metal version of the platform. And it offers to open in a VS Code desktop, but we're gonna decline that. We're gonna close this terminal to give us some more workspace. And you'll see all of the notebooks are here. All the ones that we've created. There's Hello World, and we can run that. And this is now running on that single node system that's running inside of Gitpod. We've got our donut example, and we can run that as well. And even the foliage one that we imported, we can run that, and it's fully functional. So we can scroll through the weeks and see the colors of the leaves change. Now, one important thing to note, since this is limited to 50 hours, I'm going to stop my workspace, and by clicking on the little orange square at the bottom and stopping the workspace, that will conserve the 50 hours that I get free each month. So let's talk about some resources. The repository that I just showed you is on, it's my personal one, and it has all the notebooks in this presentation. So again, I'll be sharing these slides so you can use this to actually see some of these notebooks. And I can't say enough about observablehq.com. It just has a plethora of examples, ideas, and documentation for all the different visualizations that you can use. And you can get inspiration by looking around there. You can import one of the observable notebooks and tweak it and use it for your ECL. So it's very easy once you've seen it and had a hands-on experience with those, to then change it and use one of those visualizations to visualize your ECL. So what's next? Well, obviously your feedback is important to us. That's what open source is all about. Your contributions are welcome. You could send us notebook samples, stories or story ideas. If we get a good notebook, we could include them in our examples that we share with the open source community. If you give us a good story idea, we can take it and we can make a notebook out of it and then share it. And most importantly, using notebooks and reporting issues. Right now, we're using the issue tracking system within GitHub for this, and the URL there is at the bottom. And if you report an issue, that way we'll know something needs to change, or even feature requests can go in there as well. And you can contact us directly. Here's my email address. Gordon Smith is the architect for this project. You can reach him at that email address. And I said before, you could put your questions in the Q&A chat window. But if you have any questions now, feel free to type them in. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day at the HPCC conference.